Welcome to How to Be a Person, a podcast about life with me, your host, Giuliano Grimaudo. Phyllis, thanks so much for joining me today. How's it going?
Well, it's going great, and thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, no, I'm really glad that you decided to come on the show. I'm excited to chat and get to know each other a little bit. I know you told me before we got on that you're in New Mexico. You always been there?
No, I grew up in New Jersey, and I moved to the Southwest, in the '80s. So long
Oh,
time
okay.
ago. Love the Southwest.
So
Yeah,
you've been there a while, just not always.
right.
That's cool. I know I told you beforehand, but I live in Arizona, and my wife and I we've been here for a little over 5 years now, and it's funny how quickly the time just flies. It feels like we just moved here, but like 5 years is not a small amount of time.
Right, right.
It's like you kind of move to these new places, and then you just, yeah, I don't know. It's something that like I wasn't expecting. It's like, man, time's really flown, and now this is kind of like our new home.
Great. Where are you in Arizona?
So we live in like the main valley, like the Phoenix Valley.
Uh-huh. Yeah,
Yeah,
nice, nice.
yeah. So tell me a little bit about yourself, Phyllis. Tell me what you do.
Okay, well, I have been a psychotherapist for my whole career. I'm retired from my practice now, and I'm also an author. So, and that's probably my biggest love, although I definitely loved my career as well.
Mm,
Um, so, I did a lot of therapy myself on childhood trauma. And long story very short, the work that I did on healing myself and recovering from the after effects of that really made a great spiritual opening for me, as well as a lot of just personal growth on an ordinary
mm,
relationship level. So I'm really interested in psychology, I'm really interested in spirituality, I'm interested in how they come together.
yeah.
And I'll just say quickly, the first two books I wrote were really just about my journey and the spiritual opening that occurred, and the kind
Okay.
of messages I got from what I consider a very divine source that did not come from me.
Okay.
And then my last book is called America in Therapy: A New Approach to Hope and Healing for a Nation in Crisis. And that's
Mm,
really bringing what I think the healing that's possible through psychology and psychotherapy, bringing that to a larger conversation of our nation and really the world. Because I think
mm,
we're just suffering from such mental health deficits, and we hurt each other in so many terrible ways that leave effects, on the personal and on the collective level, that I really wanted to bring the conversation of psychology to our social and political and cultural agendas.
interesting. Interesting. Well, there's kind of a lot to unpack there. I think the first thing that I have a question about is, um, like, I'm assuming I'm not alone in this, but it feels like two opposite sides, right? Where you're like, oh, like you're talking about like the, let's say, quote unquote scientific side, right, of psychotherapy, and then also the spiritual. It's like, wow, I was not expecting that when you're talking about those two things. Can you tell me a little bit about that? Because I just from my own experience and also just from hearing from other people, you assume that those are two separate paths. And so I'm curious, like how you got to that point.
I think we live in a culture that looks at it that way. So
Yeah.
that's kind of our training. My experience tells me that they're not separate. And I
Mm,
see that in many, many other people. And I think for a variety of reasons. One is that for me, I had some spiritual experiences that just kind of came to me out of the blue when I was very young.
okay.
Um, just I it's they're hard to describe, but they're kind of like just descending divine love filling me up that was really not, it was different than loving a person. It felt universal, it felt
Mm,
timeless, and it felt totally non-judgmental, that kind of love.
mm,
And I experienced that a couple of times in nature, where I had a very, very deep connection to the earth when I was quite young. And actually, one of those happened in Kingman, Arizona, where I was
okay.
spending the summer there, and I fell in love with the desert. um,
Mm,
and then but what I was going to say was that, to begin with here, is that what my experience was, and I know that everybody's experience is different, so I'm not trying to say there's a one size fits all,
sure. Sure.
but my experience may speak to some people, that every experience I had of light um, sort of was followed by illuminating some of the darkness that I was living in. So it seemed like it served that purpose. I also got into some spiritual groups very young, like in my very early 20s, and started doing some meditative and other spiritual practices. And that was really clear for me, that I would have these moments where I felt filled with something very divine, and
Mm,
immediately I would kind of be shown where I needed to do some work on myself,
mm,
on a psychological level. And I don't think I'm alone in that. I think those two things are very, very connected. And one other big way that I would say they're connected, but there's many more. But one other big way that I would say, in my experience, psychology and spirituality have been very connected, is, especially after many years of working with so many people, seeing how our unhealed wounds affect our relationship to spirit very often.
mm,
So, if one of the effects of someone's unhealed wounds is they're very critical of themselves and very judgmental of other people, it's very possible that they're going to be attracted to a religious or spiritual kind of orientation that is also carries a lot of judgment, and
mm.
that becomes part of what they believe that religion is about, judging whether it's heaven or hell or good and evil.
Yeah.
And my experiences of spirituality have nothing to do with that. They're really just divinely loving and very, very wise. So, tons of information I got about how to work with ourselves, but never from the point of view of good or evil.
Interesting. Yeah, I've had conversations like this or about similar stuff with my wife because we grew up both of us super religious, and now we're not. And it is really interesting when you transition from being part of a religion that really is, like you said, kind of it feels like it's all about judging, right? Yourself and others,
Right,
where you're
right,
constantly judging yourself for not living up to the standards, and you're constantly judging other people for not being a part of the same religion.
right.
And then you get to this point where it's funny though, because when you're raised that way, you believe in, see, I don't know how you feel about this too, but you believe in good and evil.
Totally.
And I'm like, I don't know if I even believe in those two things being separate. Like there's so much that like once you separate yourself from that, or you at least say, okay, I'm willing to consider that maybe that's not the case. You start to realize that like so much is just neutral. It just
Mhm.
exists neutrally, and then the judgment that you place on it, whether it's good or bad,
Yeah.
actually ends up determining the experience that you have with whatever it was, like a certain circumstance or an action or anything like that. And so I think that's kind of interesting you mentioned that.
Yeah, and what I would say, even to add further to what you said, is that what I really learned from connecting to a very, very deep source of love and wisdom inside myself, I mean, I got very, very specific messages,
Okay.
was that what we experience here as our, let's say, as our wounding or our less than great conditioning, maybe like what
Sure.
you're talking about being taught that you look at the world through the lens of good and evil, and you're constantly judging yourself and other people. And of course, then
Mm.
either we or somebody else never comes up to the expectation.
Yeah, exactly.
But we stay in this world where we're dominating each other with our beliefs. And
Mm.
some people are forced to comply, and other people get power from dominating. But these are all psychological issues.
Mm.
And what my experience showed me was how the psychological issues are what we actually came here to work through.
Mm.
So if you're suffering from extreme self judgment or being really critical of other people, you're going to have a hard time being really happy and successful in relationship. And so for me, this is another place where spirituality and psychology really intersect. That everything that I learned brought me right back to ground level of who am I being toward myself and other people. Am I being the way to others, for instance, the way I want them to be with me?
Mm.
Do I see their essence the way I really want to be seen in my essence?
Mm.
Do I practice, and of course, imperfectly, because we never do it totally right. We're just
Sure.
in the process of learning. But do I handle conflict with other people the way I want them to be with me when they're in disagreement with me or they're angry at me?
Mm.
So to me, these worlds really, really overlap. And the more that I made contact with my more essential self, whether you want to call it your divine self, your soul,
Sure.
your essential self, your heart, whatever you call it, the more I felt like I was directed to repair my human relations and be in the
Mm,
world who I really want to be,
mm,
which in some ways means, and I think this is very different for different people. And I think one of the pitfalls of some modern day religions is it's sort of a one size fits all. Everybody has to conform to a
mm.
certain thing.
Yeah.
What I learned is that we each have an essential self that wants to express itself in its own unique way. And coming in contact with that really gives us permission to be our strengths, to be our gifts, and to make our greatest contribution. And mine may be very different from yours. And
Yeah.
that's great because we all have something that's of value to contribute to
Yeah.
the whole.
Yeah. Yeah. There were a couple things you mentioned there that stood out to me. So I feel like I have been saying this now for a while, and again, this was after being religious, right? So,
Mhm.
in this, it was a form of Christianity, right? So you believe that you're born imperfect, that you need God, that you don't deserve God's love, but He gives it to you anyway, and so you should be grateful, and you need Him, His forgiveness. And and part of that, right, is like believing again, like it's just like this is the funny part, right? Because people will will argue about this. Well, no, it's not about judgment, and you're like, okay, it is inherently about that, right? Because you believe you have the truth, right? You believe you have the ultimate thing, and anybody
Right,
who doesn't, they don't have this same special thing that you do, right?
right,
And so like it's by definition, right? It is like judging other people,
right.
and part of that is believing that we live in this like wicked world. And it's funny because like my experience in my life, despite the things that some people would look at and be like, that's crazy, you still think this, but to me it's like I've always been able to see the good in people. And I think once I was willing to detach myself from what I was taught my whole life, I was like, okay, yeah, like I see this. Like people are good. And I'm curious your take on this because you said it yourself, right? That all of us have this like essential self that, when we are willing to embrace who that is and lean into those strengths, we're happy, we're fulfilled, and we make an impact, right?
Yeah,
And to me that is also saying like, hey, deep down everybody is good, right? Like everybody
right,
has just like a good core to them.
right.
And but a lot of times people bring up, well, what about this thing happening, or this person murdered so and so or whatever. And I'm curious because based on what you've said so far when it comes to spirituality, but also the
Yeah.
psychological side of it, is like, what's your explanation for that?
Well, I do believe that we're all born with this beautiful, essential, innocent, pure self.
Okay.
I don't know how you could look at a baby and think otherwise.
Yeah.
Um, And then we get written on by the cultures we live
Mm,
in, by the role models of the people we depend on, by the role models for conflict resolution, by the role models for how men treat women and women treat men, how parents treat children, what the expectations are for success and failure, and especially,
mm,
as I mentioned earlier, the role models for conflict resolution. What do people do? How do they behave around you? So
mm,
if you grow up with people who beat each other when they're in conflict, you have a good possibility, and I say this from years and years of working with hundreds of people,
yeah.
either becoming someone who beats people when you're angry at them and they don't agree with you, or you become someone who becomes very submissive and passive to avoid being having that
Mm,
kind of aggression come at you. And
mm,
those are two big patterns that come out of unhealed, dysfunctional human relations, whether it's beating or just yelling or name calling or ignoring or, rejecting or having expectations of someone that they're impossible to meet,
yeah.
or rigid, really rigid boundaries or no boundaries, all of these things that happen in families, and there's no
Yeah.
perfect family out there. But when a family sort of tips over to the side of being abusive or neglectful or just highly dysfunctional or addicted, or violent, then you have people becoming symptomatic. And little tiny babies and children can become symptomatic if they're in a toxic psychological environment and if they don't get rescue.
Mm.
And so, yes, some people, turn out terribly and they become murderers, or they become highly explosive or hateful and discriminatory, or addicts, or whatever, they become.
Yeah.
But these are, in the world of psychology, these are understandable outcomes for
Mm.
mistreatment by human hands without rescue and without help.
Interesting. So, would you agree then that for someone who, like you said, it's an outcome? Would you agree then that there's that there's no such thing as an evil person, but as somebody who started good, and they were, like you said, that it's almost like these things are a symptom of their experiences up until that point?
I would say that. I don't think
Okay.
there's any baby that's born evil.
Yeah.
And what I would say, though, is that because of the level of harm that we're now capable of doing to people, and maybe always have been, throughout history, but,
Sure.
um,
But
you
we're
know,
not aware of it.
yeah, yeah, and there's such a worldwide culture now of
Yeah.
influences, some of which are highly toxic and
Yeah.
terrible role models for people to grow up with. Because of the severity of what we can do to one another, there are some people we don't know how to help. And
Mm.
that's a sad fact of our present culture. But there are many people we do know how to help. If
Mm.
we look at them as an essential essence that got layers of hurt put on
Mm.
them, that they're just doing their best to survive in their own dysfunctional way, that when people are really seen that way, when they're given an opportunity to heal,
Mm.
many more people can heal those wounds and become functional, loving, contributing members of society than we now allow for in the cultures that we live in. We tend to look at people as good and evil,
Yeah.
throw them, lock the door and throw away the key. And that's a tragedy, a
Yeah.
tragedy.
Yeah. Well, that's kind of like the conclusion that I've come to, where I realized it's almost as if, so I will say, right, obviously there's some people who are going to do evil things simply because they are a product of their experiences. Okay. But I also truly believe that a lot of the evil acts that are done because you believe there are evil people.
Right.
Right. And so you feel like I have these people are evil and I have to stop them at all costs, or I have to destroy
Right.
them at all costs, or whatever it might be. But if we were all able to realize that either one, if someone is doing something evil, they're simply a product of their experiences, and two, that ultimately at their core, everyone's good, it kind of takes the wind out of the sails for that argument. Cause you're like, well, look, because this is what I never understood, right? It was always like, you know, those people are bad or those people are evil. And it was always like, I don't understand that, because it's the exact example you gave. That's what I've always thought of, was like, if you go far back enough, everyone was just a baby. You know what I mean? Like, you didn't, you're telling me in his genes somewhere, like it was something where he's going to be evil. And it's like, no, that doesn't make any sense to me. And I think that when you when you classify people as good or evil, um, meaning that you believe that those are basically the two options, good or evil, then when you put people in the evil category, it gives you permission to
Exactly.
mistreat them, to commit violence against them, to do what
Take from
anything. Like
them.
literally nothing's off the table because you're like, hey, they're evil.
That's right. That's exactly right. And that, for me, we've been sort of conditioned to believe here in America, especially in recent years, that these are ideological issues, when in fact they're mental health issues. Because
Mm,
mentally healthy people don't believe these things. Mentally healthy people look for the essence in others.
mm,
And if they can't, most of us are not in relationship with murderers. Sometimes that happens for sure, but
yeah,
most of us are in relationship with people that are equally dysfunctional to us,
yeah,
that we have our
yeah.
blind spots, that we have our anger, that we have ways that we just get depressed and don't function well, or
Mm,
that we parent poorly because those were the role models we grew up with. And
mm,
in therapy, when you start to look at someone like their essential self and you believe they can heal the worst of what's happened to them and the worst of what they've done, when we have people looking at us like that, it changes everything in our internal structure,
Mm,
because most of us are condemning ourselves or other people all the time.
mm,
And I know for myself, I have a very specific memory of the first time I felt someone saw me that way as my
mm,
essential self, and it changed my life. Because I knew that essence was in there. But when I grew up, and I'm quite a bit older than you, there was no language for any of that. Nobody talked about anything
mm.
like that. It was definitely good, bad, right, wrong, better,
Yeah.
worse, meet
Yeah.
these expectations to become a good, successful person, period.
What was that experience that you're saying that you remember?
Actually, it was with the first spiritual teacher that I encountered.
Okay.
And there was something about the way he saw me and spoke to me that lit that up inside of
Mm,
me. But you don't have to be a guru to do that for other people. We don't. I think when one person's candle gets lit, their flame gets lit,
mm.
it becomes the flame that lights that for other people. And I know that
Mm,
it really informed the way that I worked with clients. And I'm not a spiritual guru, but I knew there was an essence inside other people, and I knew they could reach it. I knew it was possible to do that. And for so many people, by the time they get to therapy or by the time they're looking for some kind of help, life looks really dark, and they've really condemned themselves to, not a lot of hope. A little bit of hope brings them through the door, but they don't necessarily know that there's light at the end of the tunnel. And
mm.
just to have somebody hold that for us, I know you can make it.
Yeah.
The wounds that you came by are not a reflection of who you are in your essence,
Yeah.
because we are not the worst things that have happened to us, and we're not the
Mm.
worst things we've done.
Have you ever heard of there's this book called No Bad Parts?
No, but it sounds perfect. Tell me about it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think the like the field is called internal family systems.
Yes,
You've heard of this?
I've very much, but I have not. I wasn't trained in that, but I know a lot
Oh,
of
okay.
people are really
Well,
into it today.
so
Yeah.
I'm obviously not super versed in it. You actually probably know more about it than I do, being in that field. I'm curious. Like when I said it, you're like, "Oh yes, I definitely." Can you tell me a little bit about it and maybe
Well, I
how it fits
can't
in with
tell
this?
you about that particular orientation to therapy because I
Yeah.
wasn't trained in it. But clearly, when anyone becomes a therapist in a psychodynamic kind of way, you understand that we have different parts. We have a
Mm,
2-year-old part that learned to adapt to the violence in the home
mm,
by by screaming, or by hiding in a closet, or by self-soothing with food or whatever. And
mm,
we have a teenage part that adapted to adolescence in a different way, or we have an angry part and we have a depressed part. there's
mm.
we and those parts, we all have parts,
Yeah.
but they become more severely like isolated from one another and possibly easily triggered,
Mm,
the more we were hurt, if that
yeah.
makes sense.
Oh
So,
yeah, totally.
yeah,
I
trauma
remember. So
creates
I
a
didn't.
problem. Go ahead.
I didn't finish reading the book. And I feel like I've brought it up a couple of times. I just really, really like the concept of it. And I got to a certain point, I understood it and I got distracted and whatever. But it really made a lot of sense to me because essentially it was saying kind of like what you just said, right? Where we all have like this core goodness to us. And then through our experiences, there's these parts of us essentially that do something to protect us.
Right,
Okay. And it's just something to protect us. And like it could be through any of these experiences, right? Like you mentioned, maybe
right.
someone was physically violent to you, or your parents just were arguing and yelling all the time, or whatever it might be. Bless you.
Sorry.
So it would be like all of these things, like essentially you're like these parts of yourself that were protecting you. And what I thought was really interesting was part of this process is like identifying those things and actually having appreciation for them, right? Because right now you see them manifesting in some sort of negative pattern in your life, right?
Right,
Right now it's like it's causing a negative effect in your life as an adult. But
right,
like in your experience, in that moment, it was doing something specifically to protect you. And it essentially did its job, right? It protected you. You're still here.
Absolutely. It was
And
the way
so
you
like,
survived. It was how you figured out to
exactly,
survive within
exactly.
in the space where there was nothing better.
Yes, yes. And so what I thought was really interesting about it was, well, there were a few things, but one of them was that like when you're able to express appreciation to that part of yourself
Right.
for doing what it did and like truly appreciating it, that it's almost like it can just dissolve because it goes, oh, thanks. Like all I needed was to be acknowledged that I
Right.
did this for you, and cool. Now I can move on, and it becomes dissolved. But part of what was interesting about that to me is that I naturally came to this conclusion that like we have to have an appreciation for the things we've been through and for who we are right now in order to actually grow in a healthy way. Right.
Yeah.
So I've been around a lot of people who are always like personal growth, personal development. And I love, honestly, that's me. Right. I love that. I love reading. I love growing. But like, if you're not coming at it from a place of appreciation for who you are and who you've been and all of your experiences up until now, it's almost like you're trying to fill, like you're doing it to for some sort of for essentially for the wrong reason, right? Whereas if you go and you appreciate everything you've been through and you appreciate your experiences, it's like you have this strong foundation that you're then growing from. It's not like you feel like you have to do it. You're just doing it from like a healthy place. And so I thought it was kind of an interesting parallel when I learned that about this internal family systems, that it's like you have all of these parts of you that have been acting this way and essentially like interfering right with your adult life now,
Right.
just simply because they were there to protect you. And if you can have an appreciation for it, then you can actually move on from those things.
I mean, that's definitely true. And that's the heart of good therapy. From one way of formulating the heart of good therapy is
Mm,
that you find those parts, you allow yourself to feel them in a safe space, because it might not feel safe to do that by yourself,
mm,
especially if it's a raging part or a self-destructive part or a part that
mm.
wants to just do drugs and numb out. Sometimes you can face those yourself, and sometimes you really need to be in a safe, caring, um, psychologically, healthy
Yeah.
space
Yeah.
to really see those parts and own them and understand that they were how you survived. You did the best you could to survive, and now you want to survive better, because most of those really maladaptive survival mechanisms are what bring people to therapy. They're what cause the pain
Mm,
in our present life. If I'm
yeah.
reaching for a drink, or I'm isolating too much, or I get angry too easily, or I push away the people that I really care about. Um, those might be my survival mechanisms, but they're not working for me anymore. And I just want to zoom out real quickly and come back to a
Sure.
point, but I just want to say that's where we are as a country. That's where we
Mm,
are as a humanity. The ways that we've figured out to survive are killing us.
mm,
Discrimination, war, weapons of mass destruction, targeting certain populations,
yeah.
alienating ourselves. What you brought up earlier about thinking, you're the better one and everybody else is inferior, and therefore that gives us license to take from them and do whatever we want with them.
Yeah.
These are the mental health issues on the global scale, the national scale, that are exactly the same as what we're dealing with in our lives.
Mm,
And that's why I wrote my most recent book, America in Therapy. But I wanted to go back and just say one quick thing, and then please jump
yeah.
in. And that
Yeah.
is, when you do that work on those parts, let's say you have, a little 2-year-old part that hid in the closet, and now you're an adult and you find yourself isolating whenever you feel scared or triggered or overwhelmed or rejected or whatever you feel.
Yeah.
When you get to hold that little 2-year-old part and understand it and look at what happened around that part that made you survive that way, choose that survival mechanism, it grows compassion for
Mm,
yourself. And when you grow compassion for yourself, the natural outcome is that you're going to grow compassion for other people.
yeah. Yeah. I'm curious if you think this is the case. Because I kind of came to this conclusion recently that I feel like the reason why a lot of people have these like negative patterns in their life is because they haven't felt their feelings.
Mhm.
that like they've gone through an experience, and instead of fully feeling the feeling, they might have felt it a little bit and then tried to
Right.
move past it.
Right.
Do you agree with that?
Oh, absolutely. Especially our most painful feelings and our most traumatic feelings, or our self doubt, or self judgment, or fear, or rage. Because, we live in a society, and I think it happens in people's homes, but I think it happens very much culturally, and
Yeah.
especially in this age of social media where there's so many role models of who you're supposed to be, that we're still really taught to look good. Whatever looking good
Mm,
is in the particular community or culture that you live in, we're taught to look good. And that often requires that you repress a lot of feelings:
mm,
your rage, your fear, your insecurity, your self doubt, your feelings of failure, or, being a fraud or whatever.
mm.
And so we compensate, with being people pleasers, or working really hard and becoming working workaholics, or getting rich, or having big areas of influence, or whatever we do.
Yeah.
And when people have a chance to know that all those feelings that they had, even the worst ones, like you hate somebody, or
Yeah.
you just fly into a rage and you're destructive and you say horrible things, the things that we came to honestly. Something really hurt us. Something
Mm,
really role modeled terribly dysfunctional behavior for us, or something. And just as we learn to survive that way, we can unlearn it.
mm. You know, what's funny is I'm thinking how, like, I've heard people say about like therapy, how they're like, well, it's like, why do I have to go and relive it? And what's funny is I think, how, I don't think you actually ever did live it. I think that's the problem. You're not reliving it. You have to live it. You didn't. And it's funny because you said about looking good. I was thinking how, like, okay, it's funny because I'm the type of person where like I do want people to act a certain way in public, right? Like I don't want people acting like psychos, but I also like if you think about it, like let's say something crazy happens to you, and you're like, or let's say you get a text message and you found out that somebody really close to you passed away, but you're in public and you're just like, okay, like I have to, okay, this is crazy, right? And you're going through all of these like crazy emotions, and like but you just you're in public somewhere, you're on your lunch break or something, and then you're like, okay, well, I still have to finish out the rest of the day at work. So you go to work and you're thinking about other stuff, and but you still have this thing in the back of your mind, and then you get home and your kids are there and you don't want to break down in front of your kids, and so you're like, hey, so and so passed away, I'm sorry guys, blah blah blah, let's do this, right? And you just keep going through this thing where you never actually feel the feelings, and maybe every once in a while it kind of leaks out, right, a little bit because it has to. Right,
Mhm.
but like then you go and it's years later and you're like, I don't want to relive it, and it's like you never lived it in the first place. That's the
Mhm.
problem. Is that would you say that that's true? I'm asking this because I don't have a college degree
Mhm.
or anything, right? But you obviously you're a therapist, and so I'm just curious like what your thoughts are on that.
Well, what I would say is, I don't disagree with you. I would just sort of add another dimension to it,
Okay.
because a lot of times people really did live through terrible things. They lived
Mm,
through watching their father beat their mother, or being beaten themselves, or being
yeah.
molested. And they did the best they could to manage those memories. They became a people pleaser, or they became aggressive to defend themselves, or all the
Mm,
things that we've mentioned, right?
yeah. Yeah.
And they may or may not ever focus on that until the pain in their life is so bad and things aren't working, severely enough that they're willing to get help, and help will direct them toward those traumas that formed the way they're functioning in the present that's not working for them. Um, and I think I like that you brought this subject up, because I think it's still a common belief in our culture that we don't have to go there. Just move on,
Mm,
pull yourself up by your bootstraps, get it together, and move on. And don't dwell, you don't, go into a pity party, or whatever kind of things we tell ourselves.
yeah.
And what I know as a therapist, and what I know as a client myself, is that doesn't work. You don't move on. You may become a fabulous workaholic and become a billionaire, but that doesn't mean you've healed the wounds and you're not acting them out somewhere on somebody, if not yourself.
Mm, yeah.
And so, and I'll just share this, because so many clients have said this, I feel like if I go into that, I'll never get out. I'll just be stuck there and I will be re-traumatized. But I've
Mm,
worked with hundreds of people and I've worked with really severe abuse. And
okay.
I've never seen anybody be re-traumatized by going
Mm,
back and remembering what hurt them, because the memory process in a safe place, in a safe environment with a safe person, actually begins to release the emotional charge surrounding
mm.
that trauma. And when that emotional release begins to happen, then we can access deeper and more functional parts of ourselves.
And so that's really what it is then, is like the more you allow yourself to essentially feel the feeling that you tried to move past, when
Hmm.
you actually feel it, then essentially, like you said, it's almost like you're spending the emotional charge that that experience gave you, until you get to a point where not that there's no emotion at all, because you're still a human being, but that
Right.
it's not, there's no emotional charge to it. It doesn't like change you.
Yeah. And when I say releasing the emotional charge, really what I'm saying is it stops running your life.
Yeah.
Begin to have a choice. Okay, I feel angry, but I don't have to rage right now or isolate or
Mm,
drink. I have a choice now about how I'm going to handle this anger. Maybe I'm going to really find the words. Maybe I'm just going to go write it in my journal. Maybe I'm going to dump with a really good friend who's, wants to listen to me.
mm.
But I'm not going to just. So when I say releasing the feeling, it's not like I just go home and rage. Maybe in a therapist's office, I beat the pillow with a bataka and scream out the rage in a
Yeah.
safe place, in a safe
Yeah.
way that's actually a true release and not re-traumatizing me or somebody else.
Yeah. So that was going to be my next question, was like, what does that look like? Because someone could be sitting here and be like, but how?
Mhm.
What does that mean, feeling my feelings? What is it? Because like you say, you don't want to go home and like,
Mhm.
destroy anything, but like, what is, and so you gave an example, but are there other examples you can give
Oh,
about like what
sure.
that might look like for someone actually doing that in a therapy setting?
A lot of it is crying.
Mm,
So many people, the minute the tears come into their eyes, they go, I'm sorry, and I don't know where this came from. I've had people who walked in my door and literally started crying the minute they sat down. And they're like, I don't even know where this came from. But they were just waiting to
yeah.
release all that pain.
Yeah, yeah. Where do you think that comes from? Because that's so true. I feel like any person who starts crying, it feels like they immediately start apologizing for crying.
Right, right. And I say,
Do you know
don't.
where that comes from? I don't know. It seems so
Well,
strange.
Well, for some people, it really was the case in their families. If you're going to go cry in your room, but go cry, or you're not
Mm,
allowed to cry, or I'll hit you worse if you cry. Um, or there's just they didn't get. I mean, I grew up in a home where I never saw my parents cry ever. I've no experience of that, no
mm,
memory of that. So there was, and we did cry alone in our rooms. That's what we
yeah,
did,
yeah,
And so you kind of learn that it's not acceptable, that you're not going to be met there, that it's actually a lower form of emotion that you should have shame about.
mm. That it's like something that little kids do and adults don't do it.
Right. Right.
Interesting. So I am kind of interested to talk about the societal aspect of this, because I
Yeah.
totally agree with you, and I think from what I could gather from what you're saying, I think kind of some of the stuff that's going on with. I mean, are you okay with getting a little more specific or no?
Yeah, I mean, I
Okay,
get specific in my book a little bit.
okay,
I'm not but let me just say the point of getting specific is to talk about what's healing.
yeah,
It's not to blame, shame other
yeah,
people.
yeah,
But if someone comes into your office and they say, and I've had clients like this, they'll say, my mother still calls me and on the phone and calls me names and demands money and shames me. And the last time I went there, I'm an adult. This isn't me. I'm
yeah,
talking.
yeah, yeah.
Uh,
As
making
if you're as if you're
Yeah.
them.
Last time I went there, my mother hit me when I didn't agree with something she said, and I say that's abuse. That's not saying her mother is an evil person. Her
Mm,
mother, obviously is dysfunctional in a very abusive way, but the point is you're being abused, so you
yeah,
know what's happening to you.
yeah,
And I've had people who were so abused that they didn't know that because they really believed they deserved it, that they deserve what they got.
yeah, yeah. So what I thought was and part of like where I was going with this
Yeah.
about being specific is
Yeah.
like let's just use an example, right? Like when you're talking about like if we're talking about good versus bad, and like, oh well, now if someone's bad, we can do whatever we want to them. I feel like the classic like current situation that fits with that is like stuff with ICE. And
Yeah. Yeah.
is that was that what you had in mind as well
I
when you were
mean,
saying that?
absolutely.
Okay.
These are behaviors that are, and this is the frame that I put around it in my book, because I really feel like sometimes people can hear this when they can't hear something that challenges their ideological point of view or
Yeah.
how they were brought up. And that is that the sign of mental illness is that we allow things to be done to other people, or we even condone things to be done to other people that we would call criminal if they were done to us and the people that
Mm,
we love. And
yeah.
that gap between what we know is right and good for ourselves and the people that we care about, and what we allow to be done to people that we have convinced ourselves we don't care about or that are evil,
Yeah.
is a mental health issue. It's not an ideological issue. It's a mental health
Interesting.
issue.
So part of the reason why I wanted to get specific about that as well is because I think that the same thing happens on the other political side as well, where like because I am like you could ask my wife. I am like the king of just like diving into comment sections. Like whenever I'm on social media, I'm like, okay, I'm really curious what everyone else is saying about this. And I agree with you, right? Like, okay, if we're labeling these people are bad, we can do whatever we want to them, right? And like that's whatever, right? Whatever ICE is doing. But on the flip side, I also see people on the other side of the political aisle, calling for Luigi Mangione style taking care of stuff, right? Like the
I'm
guy
sorry,
who
I don't know what that is. Will you tell me what that is?
yeah. So Luigi Mangione was the guy who assassinated um the United Healthcare CEO,
Oh, okay. Okay.
right? And so like they'll bring up stuff and it's exactly what you said, where you're like, if this was done to somebody else, like if this was somebody you cared about, this would be considered a criminal. But because you feel like the person deserves it, it's
Right.
okay.
Right.
Right. And that's what I'm seeing on like both sides of it. And so I feel like it's an important part of the conversation that like to say, like, I agree with you. And I think that it's something that's happening on both sides, but to like a different from a different angle, if that makes sense,
Okay.
right? Like there's plenty of people in comments who are just like, when is someone going to do it? Like it was like a whole thing on social media where people were dancing around on the issue of assassinating Trump, right? And they're like, who's going to do it? Who's going to do it? Someone's got to step up and do it. And you're like, this is kind of crazy. It's crazy that we're just saying this out loud. But the same is true on the other side as well, right? Where you're like, all these things are happening as if it's okay, and it's just not.
Well, whoever is manifesting it, that it's a mental health issue. It's really not,
Yeah.
and that's why I say it's not a partisan issue. It's the
Yeah.
level of personal development or lack thereof that we are
Mm.
operating on as a culture, that we're not correcting our own mistakes here and pulling
Yeah.
ourselves back to, can we sit down at the table with one another, which is what you'd want if you were in a relationship with your
Yeah.
wife or your husband or your boss. You'd want to be able to sit down at the table, be seen as an equal, you'd want to be heard,
Mm.
and you'd want to be valued for what your contribution is and what your argument is in the disagreement. But most of us haven't learned to give that to the other person. We just think
Mm.
we're right and we're going to win this argument by hook or by crook, and I'm going to convince you that you're wrong and bad. Um, could and that's a psychological lack of development that
Yeah,
we
absolutely.
live on, right? Most of us, I grew up that way. Somebody's right and somebody's wrong. Nobody even
Yeah.
said that. That's just what we grew up with. But we live in
So,
a world now where believing you're right and a whole other group of people is wrong, is giving us permission to murder hundreds of thousands of other people, even though
yeah.
we don't ever want that to come to us.
Yeah. Hey, it's Giuliano. I'm just popping in here to say how much I appreciate you being here listening and that I hope you're enjoying the show. The more support that the show gets, the more episodes can be produced. And if you can only support by sharing or leaving a review, I appreciate that so much. But if you're the type of person who would like to support the show directly, visit howtobeaperson.co and click support the show. Every bit of support means the world to me, and even more so those who do so monthly. No matter what, I appreciate you being here listening. I love what I do, and it's because of people like you who listen to the show that I get to keep doing it. Thanks again so much for being here. All right, back to the episode. So I'm curious then, because normally when we're talking about this, we're talking about it in terms of political persuasion, right? An ideological perspective. But when you're looking at it in terms of psychological mental health, would you say then that, like, if we're talking about where someone is on the political spectrum, and I'm not, this is dangerous territory, so I'm not trying to like label anybody intentionally. I'm trying to analyze this. When we talk about someone who is extremely far to either end, would that be an indication of what you're talking about? Like a lack of psychological development?
Yeah. I mean, when you cannot ever tolerate a difference of opinion or another point of view, or make space for another person to have equal power and equal access to resources and
Yeah.
opportunity, when your judgment has taken you to the place where it's only me and mine, and everybody else is, doesn't matter, and we can use or misuse them however we feel entitled to do. That is a psychological issue. That's what an abusive parent does. I'm right.
Interesting.
My spouse or my child is wrong. I'm going to beat them until they come to their senses, and I might even murder them or
Yeah.
starve them, in the worst extremes. And this
Yeah.
happens in individual families. So then what happens to those people who emerge from those families who never get any help?
Yeah. So it's not so right, because what I said before, like, I'm not trying to be like putting people, right, because the whole thing, right, we're saying is this is not a matter of judging. It's just a matter of almost like, what's the word, like diagnosing, right? It's like I'm just observing and stating what it is. Like you said, when someone comes in and goes, hey, this is what's happened to me, you're like, that's abuse. I'm not saying that person's evil, that they're bad, they're anything. That's just simply abuse. And that's kind of what I'm trying to come to the conclusion
Yeah.
of here, is
Yeah.
that, like, this is obviously up for interpretation, because how far to one side someone is again, that's not objective, it's subjective. So I'm not saying anything about any particular person, but if you are extremely to one side or extremely to the other side, and by extreme meaning the people on the other side are essentially less than and you don't place value on their life, then we're talking, okay, this is a mental illness at this point.
Right. And it's the seeds of war. And that's what we
Mm,
see. And that's exactly what we do.
yeah.
And one of the reasons why I feel like this is such an amazing time we live in, and a scary time, is because our capacities for war could obliterate life as we know it.
Yeah.
And, it makes absolutely no sense to be creating and building bigger and bigger nuclear
Yeah.
weapons or
Yeah.
chemical pollutants or whatever. It makes no sense. And if there was a family, if you saw an individual family and they were spending their resources on stockpiling weapons in their basement and not feeding their children adequately, you'd say they were mentally ill. What's
Yeah.
wrong with those people?
Yeah. True.
And so this gap between, our own personal understanding of our personal lives and what we condone on a political and social and societal level is widening.
Something that comes to mind is, because I've been having this conversation lately with people as well, is that I feel like we're not, this is what's so funny. It feels like technology has been evolved by us
Right.
quicker than we have been able to keep up with it. Meaning, I don't think we are equipped to handle the all of the problems of the entire world, right? Like, when I think about you just go back 200 years, right? You have no clue what's happening on the other side of the world. Like, all you're aware of is what you can see. Like,
Right.
that's literally it. And maybe
Right.
someone comes passing through your village and they tell you about something that's going on. You're like, I don't know, right? So, like, all you know of is what's in your immediate
That's right.
vicinity that you can see. And as long as that's okay, that means life is good, right?
Mhm.
You're like, life is
Mhm.
amazing, life is great.
Mhm.
But because of communication, because of technology, it's like, well, now I can know what's happening on the complete. There's no inch of this earth that if I wanted to know what's happening there, I could not know. Like every inch of the earth is possible to know what's happening there.
Right.
And because of that, it's like, well, now all of the problems of the entire earth are now in my awareness as well. And
Right.
that feels like something that we're not capable of handling.
I think that's absolutely true, and I think I really have seen that. I only retired recently from my practice, but in the last several years of my practice, I really saw that skyrocket among the people that I
Mm,
was working with, of really bringing in tremendous stress and fear and pain, from our own political system, from seeing what's going on in the world, from fear for what their children are going to inherit on this earth, in a way that in my early years of my practice and my life, nobody was ever talking about. And
yeah.
I think it speaks to a much larger, which I still call a psychological issue.
Okay.
Earlier we were saying, of healing enough that you get to the choice point where if you're angry, you're still not going to rage at somebody and call them names, right?
Yeah.
And it's not exactly the right metaphor, or the right simile here, but we have developed these technologies. It doesn't mean we should use them.
Yeah.
And I think we have to develop that choice. Do we want
Mm,
robots to replace all workers? Is that good for the human race?
mm,
Do we want to be building nuclear weapons? Um, for whoever gets rich off of them, or whatever
yeah.
ideological thing we think that they're going to protect us from? Do we want to be building something that could take out the human race and cause us to go extinct? So I think we have to, we have to heal enough of our own wounds that we can see that the survival mechanisms we're choosing to live by are just as dysfunctional as the survival mechanisms that some client walks into my door with.
So it's almost like when you think about the earth as a whole, if it was a
Absolutely.
client on the couch,
Right.
you're like, there's all of these wounds that are there as well. And that just, it's so, okay. So, but then what's the solution? Right. Because, like, you can look at the earth as a whole and be like, wow, it looks exactly like one of the clients sitting on my couch, but
Mhm.
you can't necessarily address the world as a whole to heal those wounds like you would if it was a client. Is that something you talk about in your book?
Yeah, I mean, and that's in some ways the point of the book, is that we have to do both.
Okay.
We're at a place in human history where I believe we have to look at the micro and the macro at the same
Mm,
time, because the interplay between them is is without question.
yeah.
So if more and more people grow up in abusive homes and they don't get a chance to heal, they're likely to go out and be some form of dysfunctional in society. And
Mm,
on the extreme end, they may become the dictator, they may become the despot, or they may become the person in their home who stands by and doesn't lift a finger when their child's being killed, because they've become so paralyzed and helpless
mm,
inside. Or they cooperate with an aggressor or an abuser because they're getting paid off. These are all outcomes of that unhealed cycle. At the same time, if the family of America and the family of humankind is operating on more and more lethal kinds of dynamics,
mm.
then we're being influenced by that on the individual level. So the interplay is undeniable at this point. And I wrote the book to really highlight that. And where
Yeah.
do we start? We start with ourselves, of course,
Yeah.
because, we can all be, that can't, that lights helps light up the essence in other people and help them find their true, loving, compassionate, contributing selves. Um, and I think we have to address it on a societal level. And so the point of my book is that I think one of the ways to do that is by educating ourselves.
Okay.
And books educate people. Many, many people don't grow up with any psychological expertise at all. They have no idea what family dynamics are about, what the outcomes of abuse are, what a healthy family looks like, how to bring that to their workplace. What
Mm,
do you do when you're really in conflict that could actually bring people back together, and resolve their conflict, or leave each other in peace?
mm,
There's so much we could learn. And, and then there's other people making a completely other contribution. They're doing a podcast like you and
Yeah.
bringing all these different voices to, to millions or thousands of people, people that are working to clean up the environment, people that are doing anti-bullying programs in schools.
Mm,
It's endless what we can all contribute to
yeah.
making the world a safer, more cooperative, more compassionate place.
Interesting. So, okay. So then that's because that was kind of my question is then how does, because right, we can focus on an individual level, but societally speaking, does it still, I feel like it still comes down to the individual. Because right, like what you just said is like each person, maybe volume wise, right, just statistically speaking, maybe some people are going to make a smaller impact, but some people also can make a much bigger impact.
Right.
And everyone has like a different level of influence when it comes to how much how many
Right.
people they can affect. But if
Right.
everyone is focused on whatever their sphere of influence is and leaning into what we had talked about before, like your strengths, like what it is that fulfills you, right? Because this is the thought that I had. Right? There's people who are like I can't care about every single thing, right? I can't care about the whales, and I can't care about this, and I can't care about this. Like I want to, right? I want good for everyone and everything on this planet. Okay, I do,
Right.
but I can't let it occupy my mind all the time. But the thing is that there always is going to be somebody where that issue is going to be at the
That's
top of
right.
their list,
Right.
right? And
And
so if sorry,
absolutely.
yeah,
No, no, I was just going to say, and the thing that you can do matters. And I think what's happened to
yeah,
a lot of people, and I really saw this, people talking this way in the last two election cycles, um, there's just nothing I can do. And they feel
mm,
hopeless. And so they feel like their contribution doesn't matter. And so their heart and soul isn't necessarily even in it. I'm just going to take care of myself
mm,
because I just can't deal with the rest. It's overwhelming. And it is overwhelming if you look at it like I have to save the world. I'm not
yeah,
going to, but I
yeah,
can do
exactly.
my part and I can just keep doing my part.
Mm. Yeah, and I totally agree with that. And I think, see, this is why I say when I talk about technology, for me, like really what it is just awareness. Like I've noticed that there's a lot of people who, they're like, I don't watch the news, I don't really keep up with what's going on, and I feel better for it. And to be honest, I feel like I'm mostly in that camp. But then when you see people post about that in the comments, people are like, how could you? That's privilege and this and that. And I totally get that, right? I totally understand that, right? Me being able to say, I don't want to think about that because it doesn't directly affect my life is a privilege, because if it was directly affecting my life, I would have to think about it, right?
Mhm.
Like, yes, it's absolutely a privilege to be able to do that. But does me thinking about it, worrying about it, if I can't have an impact on that specific issue, does it actually serve me or anyone else for me to dwell on that issue? And my perspective on it is no, it doesn't. But there are other things that are more important to me that maybe you're not even aware of, right? Because you're so mad at me about not being concerned about this issue. But there are other issues and there's other impacts to be made. And like, if you care about that issue, then go make an impact on that issue. Do what you can to make an impact on it. And for me, I want to focus on what I can make an impact on. And it doesn't necessarily have to be like, oh, I'm trying to build a business or trying to do anything, whatever. But it's just like what we talked about before about like when you're doing the thing that you feel lit up by, right? When you feel like drawn
Right.
to it and it gives you energy when you do it. It's like that is going to truly have an impact. And I think the message is that for some people that is a business. And for some people it's, some form of activism or volunteer work or something like that, right? And
Right.
that's okay. That's the thing about it is I think no matter what you're doing, if it's something that lights you up, I believe that you will have a positive impact on the planet in your own way. And then if all these aspects of the planet, right? It's like boop, 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 it's all going up. It's like the rising tide lifts all boats kind of deal.
I agree with that. And that concept of the 100th monkey.
No.
Know
What is
that?
that?
Oh, well, it was an actual thing that happened, and I don't remember what country it happened in, but it
Okay.
was observed that this group of monkeys who lived close to the water were eating wild yams. And
Okay.
then one monkey figured out that if she washed the yam in the water, it tasted better than eating it with sand all over it.
Okay.
And pretty soon, other monkeys started to do the same thing, just following her her example. And then the phenomenon that was so amazing was that it was observed that on another island that had no relationship to this island where these monkeys were, the monkeys started washing their yams. So it's the idea of a tipping
That's
point.
amazing.
I know. It's really an
You
amazing
said it's the idea of what?
of the tipping point. Where's the tipping point? If enough
Mm,
people do the work of healing their own human
mm,
relations, if they
yes.
find joy, if they support other people to be safe and well provided for and become their greatest potential, where's the tipping point? I don't
Yeah.
know, but I think there is one. There has to
So,
be.
so from that what was observed there, what are you drawing from that? That like there's some sort of collective conscious?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And because how did it get communicated? It got
Yeah.
communicated in some way that we don't know, could be
Yeah.
identified, but that doesn't mean it's following some law of how our psyches pick up information.
Yeah.
And I had that really big when I began to hear guidance because it was not coming from my own mind. I was
Mm,
hearing things that I had never heard anywhere else. So, how do we account for that? We actually have much greater capacities than we're taught.
yeah. And I agree with that. I actually I have a document that I've been keeping for several years now that I just call my purpose doc, and it's basically like whenever I have a little nugget that I like, I write it down, or if I, do an exercise or something like that that I really like, I take it and I put it in there, like what I did, what I wrote, and all that stuff. And part of it too, actually, I think the reason why I started that document was because I was listening to this Tony Robbins program, and he was talking
Mhm.
about writing out your purpose statement. And so that was that was why it was called my purpose doc, and that was why I had started it. But there was at some point in this document, one of the things that I said was that, you know, that I feel like part of my purpose is to help raise the collective consciousness of humanity. And
Wow.
it's honestly kind of what's so funny is like just saying that sounds weird, and also it's not like I've someone told me that. Like that was just kind of like it just came out of me. It just felt like this is what I feel like is real. This is what it feels like. It feels like the
Mhm.
more I elevate myself, not above others, but like improve and grow, and like you said, kind of like I don't even like saying work on myself because I don't know, there's something about that. Like it's that original programming of like, there's something wrong with you.
Right.
Because I don't believe that. Right. But if it's like, if you really are focused on like becoming the best version of yourself for
Yeah.
the sake of it, it's
Yeah.
like, you notice it lifting up other people around you as well. And
Totally.
so I totally believe that. I believe that like as far as humankind goes, that there is a collective consciousness. And I think part of the problem with technology, meaning when I'm saying technology, I mean like communications technology, is that we all of the negativity is what's being amplified via this technology, right?
Right.
Everyone is hearing about all of the bad things that are happening, but it's not like all the good stuff, right? Because what's really funny is if somehow social media and the news was amplifying all of the good things that happen, we'd all think we'd live in paradise, right? Because you'd be like, how many, I mean, every single person can think of at least one good thing that happened to them today. And if that was all that was being shared on social media and the news, everyone would be like, wow, life is
Mhm.
amazing.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I totally agree with that. I think technology is amazing. We are
Yeah, agreed.
freaking brilliant, the things that human beings have devised and come up with. And I think we're just at that place where we have to choose how to use it that's in
Mm,
service of our mutual good as well as our individual good.
yeah.
And that's where we stand as a human race. And I think we can help each other see that. And, if we're talking about the 100th monkey phenomenon in humans, what you're
Okay.
saying is if more people were focused on the good and supporting each other, that would be what got communicated in the field.
Exactly.
And I think we have to know that if we're communicating widely and broadly hatred and war and discrimination and
Mm,
exploitation, that's influencing all of us in the field, whether we're personally up against that in our own lives or not. And I've seen that firsthand with myself, and lots of people were really impacted by it. And we may say we don't want to know and we don't look at the news, but we know there's something horrible out there we don't
mm.
want to see.
It's so true. It's so true. So the solution though becomes it's kind of ironic, right? That like the solution is not trying to go solve all of those problems, but essentially trying to solve this problem, right? Like the problem of, and it, I don't even again, I don't like saying it like that because I don't think that
Right.
we're a problem, but like focusing on becoming the best version of ourselves in service of others, right? In it for the sake of itself, but also for the sake of adding value to other people, whatever way that might be, right? Again, for some people who are maybe more entrepreneurial minded, it's building a business that has a positive impact. For
Right.
some people, it's more like volunteering and to make an impact that way. But whatever it is, if everyone is doing that, then there's this ripple effect outwards to this collective conscious, but also just actual like real world positive impact.
Absolutely, 100%. And what I've seen as a psychotherapist, which I feel so grateful for my experience because it gave me such deep insights into how
Yeah.
we function, is that when people have a chance to heal, when maybe they're really self-focused right now, they're healing from abuse in childhood, they're
Yeah.
going through the pain of that, they're recovering their essential self in the process and peeling back the layers of the dysfunctional survival mechanisms they took on. When a person has a chance to do that and grow that compassion for their inner self that was always pure and wonderful from the beginning, they become their greatest contribution. And it doesn't
Mm,
have to be on a big scale. It just might be you're a lot more loving partner or parent. You're
yeah.
nicer to your dog. You're treat your employees better. Whatever, or you want to save the whales. Whatever it is you want to do. I have never, ever in my life seen one person heal that became more hateful, more angry, more aggressive, more discriminatory or raging or
Yeah.
addicted or whatever. They don't go together.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and it was kind of what we were talking about before about the collective consciousness, because ultimately, even if you don't go and like, oh, I'm going to save the whales, right? But if you, like you said, you're just a more loving person, you have a better relationship with your partner, you're a good parent, you're pleasant to deal with at work. It was like, well, then every person you come in contact with, everyone who is attached to your experience in any way has a better life because of it.
Right. And how do we know as a nation, for instance, that this person that we killed in a bomb wasn't the person who was going to cure cancer? We don't know that.
True. True. You know, something I wanted to comment on, because I'm sure that there's people listening who are like, collective consciousness, whatever. But, you know, something that popped in my head was like, it is very, like, it's very obvious how, see, this is what's so interesting to me, right? Because you pointed this out multiple times that when you have more love and compassion and understanding and forgiveness for yourself, you don't have to then try to
Right.
do that with other people. It just
Right.
happens naturally.
That's right.
That's what's so great. Like, you know, it's, I feel like if there's anything that's an evidence that we're all connected, it's that. Because that is literally the case for every single person. Nobody goes and like heals and loves themselves and then hates other people.
Right. They
It
don't.
just doesn't happen. It's just, it is a natural byproduct, which have you seen, there's this new show out called Pluribus.
Mm-mm.
So, long story short, it's basically, I'm only a few episodes in because it's not even, it's live. It comes out once a week. And um essentially it appears like it's this type of virus that kind of like gets spread across the entire world, and it affects everyone except for like a dozen people. But this virus, basically what it does is it connects all human
Oh,
beings.
wow.
Okay. And so they become almost like a hive mind, and they're all just like working together. It's actually, it's funny that
Right.
that's, I'm watching that right now, that this is
Right.
what we're talking about. Um, but that's what it made me think of, was like, oh, cause I was, it's an interesting thought experiment, because right
Right.
now it, it's almost as if we have that, but we don't realize it, right? Like we are all connected, but we almost like are, don't realize that we have that connection. And when you watch the show, all of these people are working together, but they're not talking, right? It's
Mm.
almost as if it's all parts of like the same body, right? Like when I do this with my hand, you know, my fingers aren't talking to each other about who's going to take the turn to touch my thumb. They're just doing it because I'm controlling my hand, right? And so that's like what's happening is all these people are working together and there's no communication. They're just passing it, the box over to so and so and blah blah blah. And anyway, I feel like there was a reason why I was sharing this. Whatever, I don't really know. But the point is that like I do think that we're all connected, and I think that the more we love ourselves, as cheesy as that sounded to me the first time I heard it, the more you love yourself, the more you will love other people. And if that love is there, see, this is kind of like my perspective on it is like, if everyone did that, then the world would be fine. That's
Right.
what's so crazy about it. Like the world as a whole is a thing, but it is 100% without exception made up of individuals.
Right.
And
Right.
so it comes down to every individual. That's really all it is.
Right. It does. It really does. I totally agree with that. Um, there was something that came to mind, but now it flipped out, so I'm not sure.
Sorry. You know what I'm wondering about, because you mentioned this a couple times, is like having these spiritual experiences where you've gotten information. Can you tell me a little bit more about that? I'm curious.
Yeah, I mean, it's a whole other dimension sort of on top of the psychological, and that's why I get so lit up about talking about both of them, because really the messages that I got from the very beginning were, what is my soul doing here in these experiences? Why am I in this life having these challenges, having these potential gifts that I'm not feeling like I'm really expressing fully? Why am I in relationship with these particular people? Why do I look for love from people who can't give it to me, or whatever,
Mm,
whatever you're dealing with? The whole idea was our souls chose this specific life for a purpose.
mm,
And this is one of the ways that I think it was really helpful for me to get out of the good evil kind of dichotomy that we tend to live in and really
yeah.
believe in. And that is that what we experience is like the straw that we're spinning gold from. Our human experience, our human fallibility, our challenges, the places where we disappoint ourselves, or the places where we have great gifts and strengths, all of it is like the fuel for the journey to raise our consciousness, to
Mm,
that, to what I think where we're going. If we're going to make it, this is my belief, is that we are going to actually realize that we are one world. It's not that we
mm,
just could feel that, but we are. We depend on people halfway across the globe not to bomb us.
so
And
true.
not to pollute the water or the air or the soil. We actually really are one world. And just like when you become healthy, you become a more healthy family member. If we became more healthy as a collective, we become a more healthy member of the family of nations. And the competition that we hold on to so so dearly would become in service of our mutual good. Maybe we're competing for a cure, but it would be for everyone, not just to get rich
Mm,
ourselves and withhold from somebody else, for instance.
yeah.
So it was really, what our souls came here to take the raw material of everything that we have, good, what we consider painful, what we consider great and loving, what's hard, um, and create a new consciousness out of it, which from my guidance was that we all become the vehicle of divine love in some way. And that was actually the intention of the creation of the human race in the first place. So we're making like this hero and heroine's journey from darkness to light, from separation to union, from however you want to look at it. And that we
Mm,
get this, I thought of this when you were talking about, well, some people say it's privilege if I'm just working on my own thing and I'm not out there saving the whales. But what if we change the lens on that and we look at it like, this was my opportunity that I chose and that I was given by my spirit to
mm,
participate in the evolution of consciousness for the human race. And I'm just going to stay on my path because that's what I came here to do, and I can honor and support that that's what you came here to do.
mm. So here's what's interesting about this. Um, when we talk about reality through this lens, it almost feels like then this reality is not actual reality, right? Because it's like, well, I came here to do XYZ.
Mm-hmm.
And that's almost like, I went on vacation to this place because I wanted to have this experience.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So like when we're there and we're existing there, it's like, well, that's one experience, but it's not reality, right? We know we're on vacation and we're going to go back home. And so that's kind of what it feels like. And I don't mean that in a bad way. I'm just saying like, well, if that is that, do you feel like that's the case? Like, and,
Well, yeah, in a way, I would, yeah, because when it's interesting, when I first began to get this experience, it was just it was an experience, not just receiving certain words in my mind. Um, I felt like I moved into a different level of reality, like and I would say it with a capital R. What we live in, we could call a certain kind of reality, is ego consciousness. And that's the consciousness of separation, good and evil, right and wrong, male against female, female, or, either way. Um, Spiritual and mundane, have and have not, more and less, all of the different dualities that we live in, and what characterizes our ego consciousness, which is a very dense level of consciousness, which can be either experienced as wonderful or very, very painful, is that we're always striving for more of something, more righteousness, more money, more food, more influence, more
mm,
power, more love, more sex, more whatever it is. And that keeps that whole wheel of duality turning, which
mm,
is because in that level of consciousness, for many people, there's never enough. So that, how do we get to more? And often it's by one of the greatest dualities is domination and suppression. So how do we get there? We get there by dominating other people, and then they're suppressed, and then they are symptomatic, and the
mm,
web of that ego consciousness gets denser and denser and denser until and this is the way I was taught, that we've gotten to this point in human history where in that consciousness our power to destroy is equal, if not greater, than our power to create. And that's the signal that consciousness has to change. It has to grow. It has to evolve into the next level, which I believe is,
mm.
that we really are all one, and that we came here to figure that out together and reconnect with one another and the earth and the greater cosmos to whatever extent we have that awareness.
It almost makes me think of like lifting weights, right? Like when you're lifting the weight, it's like you're actually tearing muscle fibers, and
Mm-hmm.
then it's like you get to a point where you're like, I can't do it anymore. Okay, and then you put it down, and then that's when like the healing begins. And
Mm-hmm.
so it makes you, it's almost what it feels like, right? It's like the weight is like increasing, and it's just at this struggle, and it's like you're getting to a point where either you're gonna break your arm
Right,
or you're gonna put down the weight and move in the right direction.
right.
um so when you say come here, it like I'm just like going down the rabbit hole here. When you say come here, from where?
Yeah, I mean, this is just my experience, and I'm not,
Sure.
like I said, it's not a one size fits all. My
Okay.
experience was definitely the sense that our souls took on human body, that
Okay.
there's all kinds of life out there in the universe that I don't know about. I believe
Okay.
it's there. I believe that there's a power much greater than human beings that created all this.
Okay.
That for me is just a given. It may not be for somebody else.
Okay.
And that there's something called spirit out there that decided on some level to individuate itself into different forms, whether it's human beings or rabbits or rocks or the earth or the solar system or whatever it is. And that we as human beings are a little like a soul seed is what they called it. There's a soul seed that gets planted in this particular body with a path and a purpose and an awareness and an emotional nature and a need for food and shelter and clothing, but also a need to grow and learn and expand. And I think that's kind of the story of the human race. Unlike
Yeah.
many other life forms on the earth, we have evolved like in very dramatic ways where
Yeah.
we sort of think a rabbit is a rabbit, you know. um,
Yeah. It's never going to be like a rabbit person. I don't know how to describe it.
Right. We have a different kind of consciousness. Now, a rabbit may have a global consciousness, I don't know, and
Yeah.
be in tune with the Earth Mother,
Mm,
in a way that maybe I'm not totally. But we have emotional consciousness and intellectual consciousness, and we have a connection to spirit for many people when they find that, um, and a physical consciousness, and we are constantly looking for new ways to live and learn and
mm,
grow, and again, for better or for worse. And I think we're at that place where we really have to choose for better.
mm. Yeah, that is interesting when you phrase it that way. That it's almost as if the whole point is to have a variety of experiences because that's all we do is strive for
Right.
a more, right? Like it's just constantly more. How do we change this? How do we go here? How do we do there? That's kind of interesting. There was something about that I wanted to ask you about. Oh yeah, so what you described is vaguely um, similar to some mainstream religions. Do you um I don't know what the word is. Do you like prescribe to any of those or no?
No, I haven't really been interested in religion. I grew up in the Jewish faith, but I never felt very connected to it. And then, as a child of the 60s, that's when there was this huge influx of gurus from other parts of the world, a lot from India, and, meditation and spiritual practice became a thing. I was in a Gurdjieff group, and then went to an ashram. And, but really, what I learned from all of them, and I can't tell you that I was the best student of any of these spiritual practices because I wasn't.
Okay.
But what I really learned is that we're looking for the God within. And I think
Mm,
any real true religion or spiritual practice, at least in my world, brings you to the God within. That
mm,
you're not a slave of somebody else's dogma. You're not living in a world of right and wrong. You're really listening to your own inner guidance, whether it comes in the form that I got it, or you just know you were meant to rescue animals, or raise
mm.
these children in a certain way and provide a certain kind of education, or whatever it is.
Yeah.
So that's my belief.
Yeah, yeah. I feel like I talk to a lot of people who feels or I have been talking to a lot of people who feel similarly to you, right? Like kind of the description you've given. And to be honest, that's kind of how I feel about the nature of reality right now. And it almost seems as if like religion was kind of born from that, like people trying to understand that, right? It seems as if people were like, oh, maybe this is the nature of reality. Just like you and I are having this conversation, but rewind a few thousand years, and people are having this conversation, and then they're writing it down and telling other people about it, and
Right.
then it becomes this thing that everyone, it obviously has evolved over time and become about rules and all those things. But that's what it seems like, almost as if like that, like I don't look at religion now as like that any one in particular is correct or even incorrect. It's more just as if like, oh, this is just some people's way of trying to interpret what is the nature of reality, and this is the one that kind of has resonated the most with them at that given time.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's true. And I think part of that is, that as finite beings, we just have this deep need to understand our mortality and
Mm,
what happens when, are we just here and gone? I mean, I think that's for all life forms, their mortality is their main preoccupation. How do I get enough
yeah.
food? How do I get shelter? How do I get what I need from other people if it's to stay alive?
Mm,
And I think many religions, um, have a slant to them that's about explaining our mortality to us, to take away the
yeah.
fear of death. And and I think that's just part of being a mortal human being. And unfortunately, we've come to believe in some very odd way that we get to kill other people to stay alive, like, right? Um, and I think if you've had any transcendent experience, you begin to get the sense that there is life that is separate from our human, very time limited form.
Hmm. Yeah, it's funny. I might have talked about this recently on the podcast, but there is this bell curve diagram that I've seen before of where someone goes from being religious to being atheist and then to being spiritual,
Mm.
because it feels like that is the spectrum, right? Where it's like you're either super religious and you believe in this rigid, like, well, obviously there has to be more and blah blah blah, and you're very like dogmatic about it, and then you're like, that doesn't make sense, right? Like I think for a lot of people that have moved past it, they're like, God, that's just so rigid, and there's so many rules and so much judgment and all that stuff, and so then people go on to completely reject all of it and go, see, none of it's real, none of it's there, it's all secular, there's nothing, there's no bigger thing, it's all a coincidence, it's all science and blah blah blah. And then you get to the point where you're like, okay, hold on a second. Right? There is a little bit more to this than maybe I thought, right? Either you have some sort of experience yourself, or you hear about other people's experience, or you start noticing coincidences with things. You're like, that's kind of a crazy coincidence. How did that happen? If I supposedly believe everything is what it is, and there's nothing beyond it, then how does that make sense? And so it feels like it's this kind of eventual place that you get to. And so I've talked to a lot of people who are like, in my opinion, in that spot of, they've gone from there to there to there.
And I think because a lot of religion, and I certainly can't speak for all by any
Sure.
means, in that beginning part of the bell curve that you're talking about, we've just projected our humanness onto whatever we're thinking a deity is. The deity is angry
Mm,
with us because we ate pork, or, you know, um, or that deity, thinks men are, elevated above women. And that's just projections of our human mental health
mm,
status onto the divine. And that's just part of the journey. And I think part
yeah.
of the journey is taking those projections off and realizing that's just
Mm,
us. And these are the things we have to work out on the human, ordinary plane of life.
interesting. Phyllis, this has been a really awesome conversation. Can you tell me again the names of your books, and for anyone listening, if they want to look them up?
Sure. Thank you. Yeah. The first two books are about my own, early life and how I had this spiritual awakening and many of the messages that I got from the very beginning. And those, I'm planning a third book. So
Oh, nice.
those two books are A Light in the Darkness and Into the Fire. And then
Okay.
my third book is the really psychologically oriented book that's addressing our nation, but it's really addressing humanity. And
Okay.
I've had lots of podcast invitations from people in other countries about that book
Oh,
because
wow.
I think the psychological principles really just apply to our human nature. But that book is America in Therapy: A New Approach to Hope and Healing for a Nation in Crisis, which is the psychologically healing approach rather than how do we win some crazy war that we're never going to win.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Awesome. And your books are available on Amazon, I'm assuming, right?
Yeah, and on Barnes and Noble and Books a Million and Goodreads, anywhere you buy books,
Okay.
you'll find that. Yeah.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, Phyllis, like I said, this has been a great conversation. I really, really appreciate you taking the time.
Well, thank you so much for having me because I thought it was an awesome conversation too. And I love the flow and the questions and, just sort of riffing off of each other. That was wonderful. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Well, thanks again, and I appreciate you, and hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. You too.
Thanks for being here. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a review or share it with someone who'd appreciate it. For everything I have to offer, visit howtobeaperson.co.